Well, this morning we have one of the most amazing stories from Jesus' life as told through the Gospel according to John. It is, of course, Lazarus being raised from the dead. There are so many incredible things that are going on in this story that it's nearly impossible to preach on the entirety of it. For one thing, Jesus going back to Jerusalem was utterly insane. Not only was it insane, it was suicidal. They tried to stone him in the past. Surely this time around, they would complete the job and have him killed. The second thing is the delay. If this is the friend of Lazarus, and it's a friend of the sisters, why would you wait? He might have kept him from dying in the first place. And if you're keeping score at home, carrying the sick is a pretty remarkable thing for convincing people that he was not just a miracle worker, but quite simply the Messiah. Wouldn't healing of a man near death be enough? And then there's the weeping of Jesus. Didn't he know all along that he would bring his friend back to life and that he would indeed turn the sadness upside down into incredible joy? Wasn't that at the back of his mind all the time? And the sisters, Martha and Mary, seems almost cruel to have put them through this, to make them wait. Oh Lord, if you'd only been here, if you had only been here, our brother would not have died. So many things going on. Any of them could be more than enough material for the preacher, of course. I'm going to go and head towards the end of the story for my sermon this morning, and I'm doing so because it is at the end of this account of the rising of Lazarus from the dead that I think we can find our own role displayed for our being Christ to the world. Can you just imagine what it must have been like to see Jesus come to the tomb, a mere cave with a rock that's rolled in front of it, and now 4 days later ask that the stone be removed? There's already a stench, according to Martha. And yet he says to do it, unseal the thing. And then with a loud voice he cries, Lazarus, come out, come out. And out he comes. Somewhere in one of Robert Farrar Capon's books, he says something along the lines of, whenever Jesus walks by, there is not a corpse that does not sit up and take notice. Lazarus sits up and takes notice of our Lord, and he emerges. Indeed, if I had been watching that, I think I would have fainted dead away. Unbind him. Let him go. Well, strips of cloth had bound his head and his feet and his hands. So take the wraps off the dead and let them live, says our Lord. So whenever I hear this, I think, well, there's at least two things going on here that we should pay attention to. The first is simply tell the story in a world that has a very, very hard time believing that life can defeat death. Because of all the unrest we read about in the papers, we are really much more used to death taking life. Indeed, this morning, to find out that 254 people have perished in mudslides in Colombia, 400 injured, many still not found. What makes this particularly poignant to me is that one seat removed from me for the last 5 days in Baltimore was Francisco Duque, who's the Bishop of Colombia. Imagine going home to that. In this context of working amongst the dead, Jesus was willing to march into the thick of danger, just like those first responders in Colombia. And despite the adjurations of the religiously powerful to behave himself and stay out of it, he instead chose to follow the love of God to the conclusion, that being united even the living to those who were once dead. He didn't even have to think twice about it. This is what you're going to do if you're going to change the world. Instead of showing strength by beating the daylights out of the Romans, what a real Messiah would have done according to the thinking of the day and the expectation, this man instead located himself among the poor, the outcasts, the sick, the lame, the blind, the dispossessed, and now even the dead, to just relieve their suffering and to defeat once and for all alienation. And where this gets to be very important is that particular part of the story is very translatable to our time and our place. We resonate with a Messiah who is out to deliver folks from something other than an occupying army. Case in point, right at the moment, the Romans are not really a threat to us, to our way of life. As a matter of fact, the only invasion we seem to ever experience is that of the Canadians who come down to go to Costco, and then once they finish there, across the parking lot to Famous Dave's for lunch, and then on the way back home to Fernie, stopping at Super One and loading up with groceries. Overcoming foreign occupation, be it by the Romans or the Canadians, is not what Messiahship is all about. We find that just ludicrous to even think in those terms. We don't resonate with that particular type of threat. But we do know very, very well what it is like to be separated from one who has died. Our dogs, my mom, my dad, beloved parishioners throughout the years and friends come just immediately to mind as they do you. And yet, through the faith, we know life is not ended, but changed. And some of us have been fortunate enough to even have a kind of Lazarus-type experience. I was with my dad when he had but a few days left on earth, and we were alone in his hospital room, and he had this wonderful vision. He looked at me and he said, "Why are all these people here?" And it was my dad and me. And I said, "Well, who do you see?" And he says, "Oh, there's Mom and Dad. There's Mildred, his sister. There's John." It was his doctor, his best friend he ever had. And they were all there, and they had all been dead for years and years and years. And so I took the opportunity and I said to him, "So Dad, do you see your dogs?" And he said with his eyes closed, "There's Skipper, there's Topper, there's Roxy, there's Star. They're all there. They're all there. All coming for him." Talk about life emerging from the tomb. It was probably the greatest moment of my life to be in the midst, to hear that. And as I have now told many of you, if not all of you, I do have that occasional impression that when I celebrate the Eucharist, that right next to me, right to the right, on the floor, sits my dog, who entered everlasting life a long time ago, Daniel the Spaniel. In other words, I get this story really well. I understand it. It is not hard to believe. And I think in many ways, all of us get it. We know there's something to this life after death, and there are others out there who could really use this good news. So we are just simply asked to go out and tell the story. Nothing more complicated than that. But we are not only called to be those changed by Jesus, we are called to be Jesus in the world around us. And that means that we have been summoned to stand at the tombs of the world and cry out, "Come out!" And then to those around us, unbind him, unbind her. Let him go, let her go. And to appreciate the need of us to get out and do that, all we have to do is again this morning take a look at the paper when we get home or hear the news on the radio or the television, and to see all of those in the world who are bound up and entombed because of poverty, because of want, because of all those various isms out there which divide and isolate, because of warfare and hatred, and even because of people isolating themselves due to fear. There are a lot of rocks out there that we've been called to roll aside. And since this separation and alienation, the world's words for sin can stink to high heaven, showing up to proclaim life where death has had its way is not always a fun thing to do. But where there is death, you and I have become equipped to draw out the power of the resurrectional life. Now, that's pretty interesting to say Is it believable? Is it true? How do any of us know we can actually be Jesus in a world that's beset with so many problems? Well, the answer is really very simple. All we need to do is look at ourselves and to see that what we have done and what we are doing and what we have been called to do. Nothing breaks my heart like cruelty and homelessness. And so we all went out and played golf in the snow. This year, lots of snow. It's hard to believe there were 2 feet of snow out there in the front yard 2 weeks ago, but there certainly was. And by playing golf out there and eating some chili and bidding on auction items, we raised over $5,000 to help vulnerable dogs and cats in the world, the least in the kingdom of heaven, or a kingdom on earth. Right now, we hopefully are completing our community effort to provide 40 hours of counseling sessions at the Abbey Shelter for abused women and their children. Cost about $50 for each of those sessions, and we now have enough for 17 hours. And so we have a ways to go to reach that goal to help them. Being mindful of the abundance of blessings in our lives, we're remembering Episcopal Relief and Development daily, using these funny little coupons that the Lake Missoula Clericus put out. The money from these things will go down to help the people in Colombia. Now, if you didn't see yesterday's, it's April Fool's Day. Laughter is one of God's greatest gifts. Put 10 cents in the hope chest for every time you laugh today. If you played a joke on someone, put a quarter in it. If you were the receiving end of a joke, put in 30 cents. Tomorrow, by the way, imagine not being able to see a competent physician, dentist, optometrist, physical therapist, or the like. If you have enjoyed such health care in the last year, give the Hope Chest 50 cents. And if you live within 50 miles of at least 2 hospitals, add another 50 cents. We're looking for $1 for everybody, of course. All that goes to Colombia, undoubtedly. We're working up the canyon with those community dinners. How many were fed last week? 75? 75 people. We're helping all those who come to us who need rent or need utility payments or medical bills answered and the like. We're together visiting the sick and the shut-in. And most importantly, we are befriending people, noticing kinship in Jesus, in especially those unlike us politically, ethnically, and culturally. In all of these things, we are in fact calling the dead out from the tombs and saying, have life, be unbound. Lent can be a really exciting and joyful season. And if you don't believe that, just ask Lazarus. Next week, as we enter Holy Week with Palm Sunday, we're going to rehearse the powerful cost that Jesus paid to make the exuberance of God's grace so prevalent. We can do much to make that journey of Jesus's worthwhile by continuing to kick open the tombs, calling the dead to life, unbinding them, letting them go. And by doing this season then becomes really a most blessed and happy Lent. Amen.